He heard the hoofbeats first. Brayarbell, the Queen's last horse, was being taken across the gravel yard to a trailer that was waiting for her, but no one was allowed to move her. No release from the stable, no transit log, and no royal approval. And as Sergeant Banebridge went outside, he found Camilla's aide holding her reins. This horse was special. This was the horse Queen Elizabeth rode in silence after Philip died. He was the only person she trusted when she didn't want anybody else there. Now they were saying it was a birthday present for Camilla's son. When the trailer backed up to the stall gate, Camilla said it was her choice now. When her son showed up in full riding gear, smiling like he had just won something, the guard didn't yell. He just came forward and blocked the way with his body. Before we show you what happened when Camilla's aide tried to grab the reins, please make sure you have the bell icon on switched and are subscribed, and leave a comment letting us know where you're watching from. This wasn't about a birthday, it was about remembering, and the guard who wouldn't let her ride away. The stables at Sandringham woke up before the rest of the estate. There was always something about the sound of hooves, breath, and food. It didn't wait for anyone to give it permission, the sun to rise, or staff changes. It just began. Sergeant Arthur Banebridge made his rounds soon after 6, his boots scuffed over the frost-slicked cobblestones, and his hands were in his jacket pockets. No clipboard or checklist, just instinct and 30 years of muscle memory. He knew which gates creaked, which stalls needed their latches checked twice, and which horses slept lightly. The air was thick with damp straw, cedarwood, and something older. It was the kind of silence that comes over a place when no one is attempting to impress anyone. He stopped at the east stable row, as he always did, at the last stall on the right. It was deeper than the others, and didn't have a bronze plate, a worn hook and a faded green lead rope that hadn't been used since fall. He didn't think anything would be different. But the stall was open, not wide, just a crack, as if someone had closed it quickly and not checked. The rope was gone, the feed was untouched, and the shavings were messed up, not because of a restless night, but because of movement. Go out. Arthur walked slowly inside. The halter wasn't on its hook. The bridle hook was empty, and the heavy wool rug that typically lay over the gate and was trod on was still warm, but not hours old warm, simply left warm. He turned and saw Jaime, one of the stable lads, pulling a sack of grain down the hall. The kid had to be less than 19. "Where's Belle?" Jaime stopped in his tracks. He looked at the vacant stall, then back at Arthur, and then at his boots. "Sir, I thought you knew." Arthur stayed. "She moved this morning. A driver from Windsor came with papers and everything." Arthur's jaw got stiff, but his voice didn't change. "Who signed?" Jaime moved his weight. "I didn't see. It wasn't my place to ask. They just loaded her up and said it was for..." He paused. "Said it was a present for my birthday." Arthur looked at him. "Is it a gift?" The boy promptly nodded. "For her son. She said there was some kind of private event this weekend, and she wanted her there for the grandkids or something." Arthur peered past him down the stable aisle, where the first light of morning was just starting to come through the higher windows. The corner of a feed sack moved in the wind. There was only one crow outside that called once and then stopped. He didn't say anything else. He just turned and walked straight to the logbook room. At Sandringham, horses didn't depart just because someone told them to. Not even hers. Not that horse, though. Not Belle's. Not the Queen's. The logbook room was hidden behind the south tack wall. The ceiling was low, and oil lights were still affixed to the beams, even though no one had used them in decades. Arthur entered after typing in the access code. The fragrance of saddle soap, leather oil, and ancient wood that had soaked into the walls for more than 50 years hit them right away. He went over to the ledger cabinet and took out the brown cloth-bound book from the middle drawer. It was called Class A Mounts, Retired, Restricted, Ceremonial. On the first page, the last entry was Brayarbell. He had written it. Private Mount of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. No scheduled transfers, no rotation, no displays, and no repurposing. Ordered by Princess Anne, Her Royal Highness. Log status, hold until natural passing. Arthur's thumb followed the line. He remembered the day Anne said it, calm and matter-of-fact, as if she were telling him which roses to prune back. But everyone in the room had heard it, and no one had asked any questions. He turned to the back of the book, the movement ledger, where all transfers, loans, and moves were recorded with dates, signatures, and witness initials. Nothing. There was no name, no authorization slip, no clearance paperwork, just empty space. Arthur put the book down and stood there for a time, looking at the shelves. Behind him, he could hear faint sounds from the morning shift, hoofbeats on stone, someone shouting for a farrier, and the quiet rumble of a feed cart. But this wing didn't make a sound. People didn't want to go near Bell's stall unless they had to. Not since the death of the Queen. He strolled to the window and gazed out at the barn. 3 grooms were cleaning out the lowest stalls. A normal morning with a normal schedule, except for one unoccupied stall, which no one had told him would there. He pulled the duty roster off the wall clipboard and looked at the names. There were no specific instructions, no orders to move, and no advance notice. His name was at the top, identified as the senior officer on the grounds. This meant that if Bell went without telling him, someone had kept him in the dark on purpose. He looked at his watch and saw that it was 7:15. The equerry office in Windsor opened at 8. He would have to wait. But because he had to wait, Bell was already miles down the road, and there was nothing he could do to get time back. Bell was more than just a horse. Not to anyone who has been here long enough to recall. Arthur had seen her for the first time on a rainy October morning. She was wearing a green robe and headscarf, and she had loose reins in one hand and a biscuit in the other. She kept passing the treat over her shoulder to one of the corgis that was following her. There was no press or ceremony, just a woman riding through the fog by herself, as if it were the only location in the world that made sense. It had been a month since Prince Philip died. The Queen didn't smile at the memorial or say anything at Balmoral or Windsor. But that morning, as Bell went along the path through the woods and kicked a low branch with a short, stubborn kick, the Queen laughed, soft and real. That day, Arthur was stationed near the northern gate with a clipboard in hand, recording the vehicles that came in and out. He looked up when he heard the hoofbeats, believing it was one of the younger riders taking out a training horse. But it was her. There was no security detail and no inquiry after. The Queen and Bell walked into the fog like they had done it 1,000 times before. She had slowed down when she passed him. Bell didn't stop completely, but she understood to slow down at the gates. The Queen had looked at him, not through him like some royals did with staff, but genuinely looked at him. Then she nodded once, a small sign that she understood. Maybe it was permission, or maybe it was just the fact that he was there performing his job, which was important. He nodded back. She kept riding. She was gone in 2 weeks, and now Bell was the last person alive who had seen those mornings, the last thing that still remembered the Queen's rhythm, her silence, her love of fog over sun, and her preference for being alone over being with others. Arthur hadn't forgotten it. No one else had either. Brayarbell was not one of the horses that wore dresses. She didn't get to go to Jubilee parades or cavalry shows. She didn't wear silver or act for the cameras. She didn't share much. The Queen's last true friend, the one who didn't need anything from her. Princess Anne had stood in this same stable the day after the Queen's funeral and said, "Quiet but clear, no more saddles. She stays. She knows too much." It wasn't formal, but everyone had heard it, and Arthur had written it down anyway, because words like that mattered, even when they weren't on official paper. The halter was gone, the stable was frigid, and the Queen's last horse was someplace on a road that was just for catering vans and construction vehicles. Arthur locked the cabinet and went back into the light. His shadow stretched out across the floor, which was covered with hay. Someone had taken Bell, and they hoped no one would notice. They were wrong. The road that went around the back of the Sandringham East Fields wasn't for show. It was contractor access, which was the way deliveries got there without messing up the symmetry of the front court. Mostly gravel, however, some parts have patchy asphalt. Arthur understood every twist and curve. He also realized what didn't belong, like the white trailer that is presently going up the hill. No royal crest, no name on the package, and no plates. He knew what civilian hiring was, the kind employed to move polo ponies to private functions. Not obvious, easy to throw away. Arthur didn't spend any time. He got his patrol bike from the equipment shed and rode it across the outer walk, where his boots made a crunching sound on the soft frost. He got down when he got to the bend and stood still with his hands behind his back. As the trailer got closer to the open gate, it slowed down. Inside, 2 aides who were not wearing uniforms were standing near the hitch and talking to a groom that Arthur didn't know. One of them had a clipboard, and the other had Bell's reins. She was covered up, with her head down, but her ears were back, tense. The person helping with the reins saw him first. "You're blocking access." Arthur didn't move. "The orders came from Windsor," the aide continued, sounding more stern now. "That horse can't be taken away. Speak with your bosses." "I am." The groom stepped back without thinking. The second helper walked toward the trailer ramp, cautiously pushing Belle forward. She stopped for a while, her hooves grinding on the metal edge. Arthur saw him then, about 30 feet back, leaning against a black Defender with the tailgate open. He was wearing a designer riding jacket, gloves tucked into his belt, and drinking coffee like he was at a country fair. Bowls by Thomas Parker. He laughed at something his driver said, then looked up, saw Arthur, grinned a little, and raised his cup in a fake toast. Arthur didn't smile back at all. One of the grooms said something under his breath that was loud enough to be heard. Surprise birthday gift. He's riding her this weekend. His mom set it up. Arthur's voice kept steady. The Princess Royal sealed that horse after the funeral, so it was never logged for transfer. The help broke. Hey, we have a plan. Arthur took a step forward. Only one, but it worked. She leaves even though I don't want her to. With a signed order, chain of custody, royal clearance or not at all. Be quiet. The helper looked at the other person, then at the trailer, and finally at Thomas, who appeared more amused than worried. Arthur took his phone out of his jacket and typed in a safe number. Someone picked up after it rang twice. Royal Archives Registrar, Sergeant Banebridge, Sandringham Detail. I need confirmation on an equine transfer, mount designation Brayarbell, personal property of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. Has a reassignment been filed? Stop. The sound of keys hitting each other. No file on that request. There is no entry, no movement order, and no authorization logged under Thomas Parker BS for that mount. Arthur hung up the phone, put it back in his pocket, and then walked right in front of the ramp. Belle still hadn't moved. The two helpers looked at each other. The younger one with the clipboard said something under his breath and got out his phone. He stepped away to make a call, possibly back to Windsor, where he was undoubtedly looking for backup documents that didn't exist. Thomas, who was still next to the Defender, wasn't smiling anymore. He pushed the car away and walked closer, this time more slowly. His driver stayed put. Thomas remarked, "You're making this a lot bigger than it needs to be," and his voice lost its lightness. Arthur didn't say anything. "We can work this out quietly," Thomas said again. "No one needs to get more upset. I'll send the paperwork by courier within an hour," Arthur added. "Filing paperwork after removal isn't permission. It's a cover-up." Thomas stopped moving. 20 minutes later, the black Range Rover showed up. No signal, no hurry, simply a calm ride up the gravel, with the tires crunching softly before it stopped next to the trailer that was waiting. One of the helpers ran over to it and tried to open the door, but Camilla was already outside. She was wearing dark riding pants and a cashmere overcoat that wasn't buttoned up. She had gloves on one hand and a clipboard in the other. She didn't look annoyed. She looked like she was getting things done. She looked about like someone inspecting the seating arrangements before a lunch when she saw Arthur. She smiled. "Sergeant Banebridge," she said in a calm, silky voice. "I hear you're ruining my son's birthday surprise." Arthur nodded once. "Ma'am, that horse wasn't cleared for transfer." Camilla looked to Belle, who was standing silently by the ramp. She was Elizabeth's favorite. You know that. Thomas loved her. It seemed right. Arthur answered, "With all due respect, Her Majesty never rode with Mr. Parker BS, not once, and Princess Anne ordered the mount to be sealed after the funeral." Camilla moved closer, and her boots lightly clicked against the edge of the trailer. "Yes, well, verbal orders are sentimental, aren't they? This is a family gesture. It's not that bad, really." She picked up the clipboard. "Here's the approval for the transfer. It's not official, but it's personal. Surely no one is saying that the Queen would have been against her grandson using her favorite for a single weekend ride." Arthur didn't even look at the page. "She wasn't yours to give away." That made her halt for a second. Camilla's smile stayed the same, but her eyes got a little narrower. "I understand your point of view, Sergeant, but this isn't a matter of national protocol. It's a gift for your birthday." Arthur responded. "That form doesn't have any signatures on it. No inquiry, no Princess Royal, no archive entry. You skipped the steps." Camilla put the clipboard under her arm. "I acted on Charles's behalf with his full trust. You can check that later, but right now you're in the way of a personal request." Arthur stood up straight. "Right now, ma'am, I'm standing between a holy memory and its new use." She moved forward a step. "Are you refusing to back down? I'm following an order that your office seems to have missed." Camilla's voice got calmer. "Be very careful, Sergeant. You sound like you're not following orders." Arthur looked her in the eye. "And now you sound like you think the Queen's mount was part of your inheritance." There was a calm beat between them. One of the aides behind her moved around anxiously. Thomas, still leaning on his Defender, started to approach the trailer. Camilla's face became flat. "Mind your posting?" Arthur didn't even blink. My post is a tribute to the memory she left behind. I'm exactly where I should be." Camilla turned away, but she didn't ignore him. She knew exactly what stall that horse had been in, and who it still belonged to, even if she was following the rules and filling out the paperwork. Camilla left, but Arthur stayed where he was, did not change his mind. He didn't check his phone, he just stood there with his hands behind his back, feeling the weight in his chest get heavier. For a moment, just one, he wondered if one sergeant standing alone in a stable yard with no written orders and no witnesses could really stop this. Not about Belle or the Queen's wishes, but about that. The crown gave Camilla power. The family name was Thomas. And what did Arthur have? A remembrance of a talk that no one had bothered to write down. He turned to Belle again. She was watching him now, with her ears forward and her eyes calm, waiting. He understood then that it didn't matter if he won. It didn't matter if they flagged him, turned him around, or buried him in disciplinary reviews. What mattered was that someone was there. Someone did remember. Someone said no when they needed to, because no one else would do it. He took out his encrypted gadget, covered the screen with his hand, and typed in a number he hadn't used in months. 1 ring, 2, and then a voice that sounded elderly and gruff. "Foster." Arthur breathed out through his nose. "It's Banebridge." A pause. "Let me guess, someone moved Belle. She's already on the ramp." There was another pause, and it lasted longer this time. "I had a feeling this day would come." Arthur didn't say anything. For almost 30 years, Foster had been the Queen's top stable master. Now I'm retired. Talked to only a few individuals, and even fewer about Belle. She gave the order herself, Foster remarked softly. September 12th, the last time she rode, told me clearly, she stays here. She doesn't perform, she doesn't parade, she knows too much. Arthur shut his eyes. Did she really say that to my face? Foster stated. We were brushing her down after a trail ride, said it softly, like she already knew someone would try to move her one day. He nodded at Anne. I didn't write it down. It wasn't the right time for paperwork, but I knew what it meant. The Princess Royal did too. Arthur hung up the phone. He then used the secure channel on his device to connect with Princess Anne's direct relay team, Equerry Office 2. He wrote, Mount Brayarbell. Transfer without permission is in progress. No file for the ledger. No staff clearance. Said it was a birthday present for TPB. HR put a verbal seal on it after the funeral. Should I back down or stand my ground? He sent it. It was 30 seconds. Then a response came through. No written order, but verbal stands. Do what you know is correct. Arthur looked at it for a while, then locked it and put it back in his pocket. He went back to Belle's stall, which was empty. There was still a slight fragrance of molasses in the feed bin. He bent down, took a single yellow rose from the bush outside the window, the sort the Queen had always liked, and put it over the top of the gate where the halter used to hang. He then turned around and went back to the trailer. Belle stood with her ears perked up and her eyes steady. She wasn't calm, but she was concentrated, like she knew the difference between being taken away for a ride and being taken. Arthur stood in front of the ramp again, quiet and still. The aides looked. Thomas looked unhappy. Camila was still talking to someone on the side. Arthur didn't look at any of them though. He was already talking, but not in words. Thomas Parker BS didn't run at Arthur. That wasn't how he did things. He walked with his hands in the pockets of his fitted blue blazer, and his stance relaxed, like he was going to talk to a waiter who had served him the wrong wine. His face didn't show how tense he was. It was calm, almost kind, as if he thought everything might still be fixed. Arthur didn't move. Sergeant Banebridge, right? Thomas remarked, pausing just short of arm's length. He smiled without even trying. Afternoon. What a nice day to be outside with the horses. Arthur didn't say anything. Thomas laughed a little. Hey, I know this might seem strange, the way she's being moved. But between us, the paperwork will catch up. It always does. Still, nothing. Belle's just coming with me for a few weeks, he said, lowering his voice as if he were doing Arthur a favor. Mother thought it might be good for the grandkids. You know, a little royal tradition. Arthur's gaze stayed on the ramp. Thomas leaned forward a little. I know it's not official, but sometimes things don't need to be. You've been around long enough to know that not everything gets written down. A break, Arthur then replied in a low, calm voice. That's exactly why she can't go. Her Majesty gave a verbal seal. It was passed on. It stands. Thomas's appeal was starting to fade. You're talking about something that isn't even on record. No one saw it. It isn't on record. Arthur responded simply. That's why I'm here, to remember what wasn't written. Thomas let out a breath through his nose, and his irritation showed. This isn't your call. No, sir. But it wasn't yours either. Thomas changed his approach and tone. Listen, I get attachment. I do. My grandmother loved this horse. We all did. But she's getting older, Sergeant. 12 years old. She needs exercise, friends, and a purpose. Keeping her in a sealed stall isn't honoring her memories. It's burying her alive. Arthur's jaw tightened, but he didn't say anything. Thomas kept going. Do you think the Queen would want Belle to stand in the dark, alone, and collect dust? Or would she rather be with her family and do what she was born to do? Arthur added quietly. She wasn't bred for photo ops. Thomas's face got firm. Be careful. She was raised to trust, Arthur said, and the Queen trusted her enough to leave final instructions. You want me to ignore those because they are inconvenient? He moved closer, and his voice got more tense. Do you know how many people I've seen standing guard, dressed like you, thinking they were protecting something sacred, only to be sent home a week later like they were never there? Arthur didn't move. Thomas's voice got lower. Sergeant, you're only here for a short time. This family, this legacy, those things will last forever. I promise you that no one will remember a stable disagreement about a horse 5 years from now. Arthur's mouth was fixed, but he didn't fall for it. Instead, he murmured softly, almost respectfully, who will she remember? The Queen. For a second, Thomas looked like he was really confused. Then he laughed. Sergeant, she's dead. Arthur's voice stayed silent. Her wishes didn't die with her. There was a long silence between them. Thomas's disguise eventually broke, and his annoyance showed through the rehearsed smile. But before he could say anything, the loud sound of boots intervened. 3 aides were coming back with new paperwork, probably made up under pressure. At the same time, a voice that was recognizable to me came from across the courtyard. It wasn't loud, but it was clear. Stay where you are, Sergeant Banebridge. They both moved. Princess Anne was coming toward them, and she didn't look happy. The courtyard seemed to stop moving when she got there. Princess Anne went with determination, her face unreadable. She didn't look at Thomas. Instead, she looked at Arthur Banebridge, who was the only one who hadn't moved. 2 quiet helpers followed her. One of them was holding a red file folder. The grooms, who had been observing from the stable door, stepped back without thinking. One of the junior staff members, who was next to the trailer, walked to the side, as if they had to check on something important on the ground. Camilla, who had been talking to a helper near the gate, halted in the middle of a sentence. She turned slowly and watched Anne come closer. Arthur couldn't quite tell what she was feeling, fear or calculation. It seemed like she was already changing her plan. Arthur paid notice. Thomas sought to get back his old charm, Aunt Anne. But she raised one gloved hand, not in a dismissive way, but in a firm way. Not right now. Thomas stopped talking and pressed his lips together. Anne halted in front of Arthur and nodded once. Not hot, not cold, simply solid. Report. Arthur didn't mess up. Attempted to move Her Majesty's horse without a filed transfer. Verbal protections in place. I invoked pause under preservation authority pending review. Anne peered past him at the ramp where Belle was still standing, shifting her weight a little and flicking her tail with silent strain. After that, she looked at the helper with the red folder. It was given over without a word. Anne opened it, looked through it quickly, and then closed it again. Invalid, she answered plainly, handing the folder to Thomas without any fuss. Signed under duress. Staff pressured. Process skipped. Thomas didn't want it. Mother only wanted to, he said slowly. She's not your mother, Anne said in a quiet voice. That stopped him. That horse isn't hers to give or yours to take, she said, pointing to Belle. She's your stepmother. Thomas's throat twitched, but he didn't say anything. Princess Anne looked back at Arthur. Thanks, Sergeant. Arthur nodded sharply. Ma'am, stay with Belle, take her back to her stall, and seal the stable log again. She looked at the aides and made sure that the spoken order was written down for good. Late entry. Yes, ma'am. Thomas let out a sharp breath. Are you kidding? Anne turned to look at him. She really looked at him, not as relatives or someone she had known since she was a child, but as a citizen who was too close to something holy. You don't owe her anything, she whispered softly. None of us are. We're just supposed to keep it safe. The silence that followed hit like iron. Anne then turned back to Arthur one last time. Her Majesty trusted her guards, and that trust still stands. Make sure she gets home safely. Yes, ma'am, Arthur answered in a voice like stone. Thomas stood still as she turned and walked away, with aides rushing to catch up. He was no longer rebellious or smug, he was just stuck. Arthur didn't even look at him. He moved toward the ramp and started to take Brayarbell home. When they got back, the stable was quiet. No help, no brass, and no son of a queen pretending to know what it means to carry on a legacy. Sergeant Arthur Banebridge, A Coldstream guard with dirt on his boots and sweat chilling under his collar walked next to the Queen's last horse, which had never broken formation in 20 years. Brayarbell walked like she knew where she was going. The whole time Arthur didn't say anything. By the time they got to the stall, the light had changed. Low orange light coming through the iron-framed windows and making streaks on the stone floor. Belle stopped just outside her pen, her nostrils twitching slightly. Then she went inside. Arthur closed the gate behind her. He reached up to reattach the bronze plate with her name on it. Brayarbell, H.M., Mount No. 1 star. Then they looked at the record log that was pinned to the door of the stall. The latest formal entry was a feed check that was made 11 months ago. He took out his pen, turned to a new page, and wrote, "Reinstated by verbal order, per Princess Royal. Guard in attendance, Sergeant A. Banebridge, initialed, dated done." He started to leave, but suddenly he stopped. He saw something on the ledge near the corner of the stall just below the feed bin. It was a folded piece of faded waxed paper that smelled like leather and lavender. He picked it up and cautiously opened it. There was a handwritten line in black ink within that was dated 2 months before the Queen died. "Leave Belle where she is. No one else will write to her. The royal seal is all there is." Arthur looked at it for a long time. The edges of the paper were soft and had creases where it had been folded and refolded. He could see her penning it, perhaps at the little desk in the Balmoral study with a fountain pen in hand. No hoopla, just clear writing. She knew someone would try, and she knew that feelings alone wouldn't be enough, so she left proof, not for the future, not for the archives, but for whoever was here when it mattered. Arthur folded it again, this time neatly and exactly, and put it in the inner pocket of his jacket. In the morning, he would file it, make sure it was typed up, and make sure Princess Anne saw it. But tonight, it stayed with him. He looked at Belle one last time. She was now standing near the rear of the stall, with her head down, breathing steadily, and feeling calm. Arthur went outside, pulled the door shut with both hands, and heard the brass latch click shut. Last, for sure, preserved legacy. He heard the hoofbeats first. Brayarbell, the Queen's last horse, was being taken across the gravel yard to a trailer that was waiting for her. But no one was allowed to move her. No release from the stable, no transit log, and no royal approval. And as Sergeant Banebridge went outside, he found Camilla's aide holding her reins. This horse was special. This was the horse Queen Elizabeth rode in silence after Philip died. He was the only person she trusted when she didn't want anybody else there. Now they were saying it was a birthday present for Camilla's son. When the trailer backed up to the stall gate, Camilla said it was her choice now. When her son showed up in full riding gear, smiling like he had just won something, the guard didn't yell. He just came forward and blocked the way with his body. Before we show you what happened when Camilla's aide tried to grab the reins, please make sure you have the bell icon on switched and are subscribed, and leave a comment letting us know where you're watching from. This wasn't about a birthday, it was about remembering, and the guard who wouldn't let her ride away. The stables at Sandringham woke up before the rest of the estate. There was always something about the sound of hooves, breath, and food. It didn't wait for anyone to give it permission, the sun to rise, or staff changes. It just began. Sergeant Arthur Banebridge made his rounds soon after 6. His boots scuffed over the frost-slicked cobblestones, and his hands were in his jacket pockets. No clipboard or checklist, just instinct and 30 years of muscle memory. He knew which gates creaked, which stalls needed their latches checked twice, and which horses slept lightly. The air was thick with damp straw, cedarwood, and something older. It was the kind of silence that comes over a place when no one is attempting to impress anyone. He stopped at the east stable row, as he always did, at the last stall on the right. It was deeper than the others, and didn't have a bronze plate, a worn hook and a faded green lead rope that hadn't been used since fall. He didn't think anything would be different. But the stall was open, not wide, just a crack, as if someone had closed it quickly and not checked. The rope was gone, the feed was untouched, and the shavings were messed up, not because of a restless night, but because of movement. "Go out." Arthur walked slowly inside. The halter wasn't on its hook, the bridle hook was empty, and the heavy wool rug that typically lay over the gate and was trod on was still warm, but not hours-old warm, simply left warm. He turned and saw Jamie, one of the stable lads, pulling a sack of grain down the hall. The kid had to be less than 19. "Where's Belle?" Jamie stopped in his tracks. He looked at the vacant stall, then back at Arthur, and then at his boots. "Sir, I thought you knew." Arthur stayed. "She moved this morning. A driver from Windsor came with papers and everything." Arthur's jaw got stiff, but his voice didn't change. "Who signed?" Jamie moved his weight. "I didn't see. It wasn't my place to ask. They just loaded her up and said it was for—" He paused. "Said it was a present for my birthday." Arthur looked at him. "Is it a gift?" The boy promptly nodded. "For her son. She said there was some kind of private event this weekend, and she wanted her there for the grandkids or something." Arthur peered past him down the stable aisle, where the first light of morning was just starting to come through the higher windows. The corner of a feed sack moved in the wind. There was only one crow outside, that called once and then stopped. He didn't say anything else. He just turned and walked straight to the logbook room. At Sandringham, horses didn't depart just because someone told them to. Not even hers. Not that horse, though. Not Belle's. Not the Queen's.